Welcome to The Spider's Web. The Spider's Web is a podcast that weaves together humor and knowledge in bite-sized episodes. I'm joined every week by The Soul Vacation, and I'm Spider Theory. Let's get started. Do you know Stockholm Syndrome isn't real?
I did not know, and you piqued my curiosity.
Yeah, so it is made up. It was invented by a police psychiatrist, and the reason it was invented was misogyny.
Surprise, surprise!
He wanted to discredit a female hostage that was being held in 1973 bank heist in Sweden because she didn't like him.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, so if we want to get into it, it is a fascinating story. It has absolutely no diagnostic criteria. It's riddled with misogyny and completely founded off of a lie because this dude didn't like this woman. And so the psychiatrist who completely made this up, his name is Nils Bejerot. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Bejerot. He actually never spoke directly to the woman that he based this entire thing off of. Never met her, never spoke to her. He never bothered to interview her and ask her why she said that she preferred the captors over the police. So he just made up something and assumed that it was because of this whole Stockholm Syndrome thing and that women, they fawn over their captors at a certain point because they're damsels in distress. And in reality, this woman, what she had experienced at the hands of the police versus at the hands of her captors, makes total sense why she trusted her captors over the cops.
I feel like media hasn't shown enough of the woman's perspective of an interrogation. Cop shows are always like, oh, she's being resistant, she's being cold. Why? Why is the person being interviewed being resistant and cold? Why do people not report crimes? And there's a lot of sociology and psychology that goes into that I feel like people aren't aware of.
Well, you want to know why a lot of the media you see doesn't portray that? Because it's propaganda.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
propaganda to promote police and the good that they do, and so they're not going to look bad. They're not going to make them look bad for the most part.
Really love that about a book called Lessons in Chemistry. I thought it was going to be a romance book because of the cover, and so I was like, and everybody's like, you gotta read it. I finally audiobooked it, and it is a female empowerment book.
That's cool.
As a fictional book,
Mm-hmm.
and one part of it deals with that exact same thing, sexual assault, and as she's reporting it, it's that perspective of the cops. It's 1950s in the book, and him just dismissing her and telling her exactly how to feel and when to feel it, and then getting kicked out of school and like blah 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 blah.
Wow.
For being the victim.
That's horrible.
And I've just we don't often see that in media. So I think that's why it's important to tell those stories.
Absolutely, and that's why I want to talk about this whole Stockholm Syndrome thing because, you know, it's gotten out of hand to the point where we're all using the term and we believe in it as a whole, and people need to know the origins because if you did, you wouldn't believe in it, you wouldn't use it, it's not fucking real. And if you want to believe in that kind of thing, you're perpetuating misogyny. The woman who this was all based off of, who this is named for, it's named after the fact that this bank heist happened in Stockholm. The woman who was involved, her name is Kristen Enmark. She was 23 years old, and it was the morning in 1973 where she walked into a bank, and her and 3 other clerks were taken hostage. They were taken hostage for 6 days.
She was just working?
Yeah, I think she was there to do banking.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she was just there to make a deposit, get something out. Like, it was wrong place at the wrong time kind of thing. And so they held them captive for 6 days. The police had no training on hostage negotiations, so they were kind of like completely over their heads to the point where listen to what fucking happened. They decided that, I don't know how, but they found this teenage boy who they thought was one of the bank heist little brothers. He's a teenage boy. They send him in to do hostage negotiation. Well, it turns out nobody knows who this kid is. So they send this kid in thinking it's one of the hostages' little brothers. It's not. So he gets shot at. This kid. that they sent in. And so that was a fucking disaster.
Did the kid die?
No, he just shot at him. I think it was to get him
Okay.
away. And so during this 6-day ordeal, at some point, one of the perpetrators comforted Kristen, held her hand, comforted her, made her feel as though she said she felt as though the things he was saying that she knew everything was going to be okay. And she said he offered her more comfort than the police did at all. She tried to speak to the police. They told her no. They wouldn't even talk to her. And so, I mean, the days kept going on, and it got to a point where she knew that if she didn't do something, that like their time was running out. She wasn't sure what was going to happen, but like she needed to do something. There was a live radio interview from the bank while she was in there, and she blew up at the cops because she was so angry well, they sent that kid in. It had been 6 days. People were refusing to talk to her. That's absolutely ridiculous. And I know it's unprecedented, but Jesus. So she said, this is a quote, "The police are playing with our lives, and then they don't even want to talk to me. Who is the one who will die if anything happens?" She had the sense that they weren't going to survive. So she somehow was able to call the Swedish prime minister, and she begged him to let her and the other hostages leave the bank with the captors. She told this prime minister, quote, "I fully trust Clark," who was the guy who comforted her. "I fully trust Clark and the robber," she told Palme. "I am not desperate. They haven't done anything to us. On the contrary, they've been very nice. But you know, what I'm scared of is that the police will attack and cause us to die." So the prime minister refused to let her leave, saying that they could not give in to the demands of the criminals. Even though that was their way of getting out, they were like, no. At the end of the conversation, she said, he told her, "Well, Kristen, you can't get out of the bank. You will have to content yourself that you will have to die at your post."
Oh my God.
The prime minister, and maybe she did work there, the prime minister said, "Sorry, we're not going to negotiate with these people. You need to accept the fact that you're going to die at work." And they have the audacity to wonder why she preferred the men in the bank who did nothing to her. They were using her as a pawn to get what they needed from a government that I don't even know the backstory of this. Who knows what the hell was going on? Yeah. But how dare they? I would also be angry with them. The prime minister tells you, "Sorry, you're not worth it." And then she tells him, "I don't want to be a dead hero."
It's a very classist system, and I think sometimes we forget that our government is classist, like, because they run on the platform that they're for the people, but they are not in the same class as the voters.
Yeah, and they will...
And that infiltrates everything of the government, whether it's
even hostage
all
negotiating.
the way up to the prime minister, down all the way to the local cop.
So, yeah, she has this heated conversation with the prime minister who tells her basically, like, "Fuck you, go die." And eventually the police tear gassed the bank vault, and they took the captors and then paraded them up and down the street as people cheered. Like, you're heroes? Oh, good job. She was so mad watching them do this. They told her to lay down on a stretcher so they could wheel her out of there. What? What? For what? To further this weak female narrative when she's the only person in the bank trying to get anything done? This 23-year-old young woman.
Could you imagine?
No.
When you were 23, dude? That you're basically a child.
Yes. She goes back on the radio and she criticizes the police again, and she singles out this Barreau guy. It was the psychiatrist who said that she has this, what he called normal strong syndrome, which was later renamed to Stockholm syndrome. She just, so he basically explains that the fear that and anger that this woman has towards the cops is completely irrational, and it comes from her sexual attraction and desire for her captors that she had over the 6 days that she was there.
Male incompetence. There's got to be any other excuse before they admit Their own incompetence.
And then let's talk about the perfect victim also. They said she didn't seem traumatized enough, so must have been something weird going on. Because that's not how someone would have acted.
Even though, meanwhile, her actions are showing you how much trauma she's gone through. You have to have gone through a lot of trauma to want to get back on the radio and
talk crap about the police again? She does not appear as traumatized as she ought to be, end quote. It is hard to admit, one journalist wrote, but the words that come to mind to describe her condition are fresh and alert. Her clarity was apparently proof that she was sick. Wow. So when you aren't freaking, when a woman loses her emotions, when she can't control them, she's sick and she's thrown in prison. When she keeps her cool and she's angry and she knows what she wants and what she needed and nobody came to her, she's sick.
You're crazy.
She's crazy. Yeah. Women can't win.
You're hysterical or you're crazy.
Why are you so calm in this situation? Why are you so upset in this situation?
Female hysteria has always been that opposite.
And honestly, in this day and age, I think people can get behind this. So this says 4 years later, she was asked to explain her actions. She says, "Yes, I was afraid of the police. What is so strange about that?"
Yeah.
And I think now that it's been 50 years, I think we're at a place where we're ready to talk about the fact that we don't call people crazy for being afraid of the police.
Yeah. Yeah.
How dare you call someone crazy for being afraid of the cops? And this happens so much. I don't know if you know this, but schizophrenia and when I was in school learning about psychology, I learned that certain mental illnesses are more common in certain demographics, or they're more diagnosed, let's say. Schizophrenia is more diagnosed in Black communities, and it became more diagnosed after the Black Panther movement and civil rights, because all of a sudden Black people were paranoid that the government was watching them and going after them. That couldn't be happening. They're paranoid that the cops are after them, that there are hit squads going out. These are real things, and they used psychiatry and medical systems to put people away for this shit. And it's happening again. That's exactly what we're doing with this Stockholm syndrome thing. We're pathologizing something that is completely understandable, which is a woman who was betrayed by her government and the police, and she trusted people who comforted her in a time of crises.
And I think that's kind of behind the colloquialism of Stockholm syndrome being like so casually used. And it's like, is it because it fits the narrative of incel culture in a way that is,
it's a fantasy.
She's gotta be crazy.
It's a fantasy. This instance reminds me of one of my favorite books, which is The Collector by John Fowles. And it is about it very much reminds me of incel culture and also just misogyny in general and how men feel entitled to women's bodies and women in general and girls. And The Collector is about, you follow this young man as he stalks this woman and gets this house ready. And he takes her to this house. And the first half of the book, you read it from his perspective. And then the second half of the book, you read it from her perspective.
Damn. Wow.
You should read it.
I've read it. I think I've read it.
It's incredible.
But I want to reread it as an adult because I think I read it when I was like high schooler, so it just scared the shit out of me.
It is.
I didn't put the psychology behind it that now as an adult woman I would have, and how everyday experiences are like that.
There was a review done of literature on Stockholm Syndrome. This was done around 2008. And they found that most diagnoses of Stockholm Syndrome were made by the media.
Oh my God.
Not psychiatrists, not professionals.
Because it fits the fantasy. And what is it you want?
And bring that yes, and that's what I think we didn't touch back on with the John Fowles, The Collector thing, is that there is this idea that, I could kidnap her and eventually Stockholm Syndrome will kick in.
Right.
Excuse
me?
Incel
propaganda.
Yeah, I think that's it for the Stockholm Syndrome thing. It's just, it blows my mind that people still use it. I heard this years ago, but I feel like it's important to share because nobody talks about it. It's not real.
Yeah.
Talking about it and using it is based on in misogyny. It has no scientific backing at all. And we
And it's
shouldn't,
perpetuating a fantasy of
yes, most of all.
incel culture.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't think of that. And I think, you know what? I think you're right. I think absolutely there is this element that it's so common in our society and everybody knows what it is that people think it's real. So how does that play into the idea that eventually she'll fall in love with you, even if it's not kidnapping? Stockholm syndrome in an abusive relationship.
Abusive relationship, a narcissistic person.
Yes.
A lot of damage can be done. And then it ties back into our episode where we are talking about how satire can go over people's heads.
Mm-hmm.
So is it people, I'm not saying Stockholm syndrome is satire at all. What I'm saying is it going over people's heads and then they start believing exactly like you're talking about in The Collector. Oh, well, she'll fall in love with me eventually. And that it's out there doing harm.
Well, what does it do to women who think this is real?
Yeah.
Because if you think this is something that happens, and like, what does that do to you when you are in an abusive relationship? Or, I don't know. It has an effect on both sides. What is it doing to the men? What is it
Yes.
doing to the women?
And it doesn't play out in many gender dynamics.
Yes, but what I find interesting is the media does not talk about Stockholm syndrome when it comes to men, for the most part.
Ever.
It is really
Yeah.
only reserved for female captors, which I find weird. Why would that be? It doesn't make sense. Because it's not
Yeah,
real
well,
and it's
rooted
based in
in
misogyny. Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you for listening to the Spider's Web podcast. You can find links to most of the things we talked about in the show notes. And if you'd like to follow me on TikTok or Instagram, I'm Spider Theory, and you can find The Soul Vacation on TikTok and Instagram at The Soul Vacation. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.